Welcome back to Utah Studies. Today we're learning about Chapter 8, so let's get into it. Okay, Chapter 8 is called Turmoil in the Territory. Okay, there are some unintended consequences whenever you bring in a new people group, and so we'll talk about that. And one of those unintended consequences is going to be disease. All right, then we're also going to talk about one of the big themes of Utah history, and that is conflict and cooperation. Okay, before any Europeans ever came to Utah, the Native Americans, they would sometimes fight or sometimes get along. Okay, conflict and cooperation. It's a human, a human condition, and so it manifests itself in a variety of ways here in the Utah territory. All right, so let's keep going. Course objectives. Why, what's the difference between the Native Americans and the Mormon pioneers? So why don't Native Americans build schools, or where do they build schools? We'll talk about it. Do you remember the Columbian Exchange from last year? If you don't, I'll refresh your memory. It's not exactly like it, but it's got some similar themes. And then I put frenemies because different tribes have different relationships with the pioneers coming into Utah. What are the tasks that are important when the pioneers first arrived to Utah? First thing you need is food and water. That's right. And then you need shelter. And the last thing you'll do is explore the valley. Okay? Book wants you to know that. By the way, almost any civilization, the first thing they're going to do is plant crops or divert rivers because you need water, and there are no Solbergs back there. There's no stores. So if you like food and water, you better get working on it. Okay. As a whole, Native Americans, where are their schools, where are their churches, where are their stores? They don't build them. They either have that outside or maybe inside someone's house. Does that make sense? Okay. So they don't build the cities the same way that the Mormon pioneers will. Now, where will the Native Americans want to live? Think about it. In Utah, where are the best places to live? Where are the Native Americans going to want to live? Take a second and think about this. Okay, you're going to want to live where it's easy to farm, easy to acquire water, maybe safe from enemies, something like that. Well, guess what? Where do the pioneers want to live? Somewhere where there's water, easy to farm, safe from enemies. Does that make sense? They're going to want the same land. To be continued. Okay. You can't just say Native Americans felt this way or that way because it depends on the tribe. Some tribes don't care. Some tribes don't want the settlers. Some tribes do want the settlers. Okay. So one Ute tribe wanted Brigham Young to come in and help fight against another Ute tribe. So you can't, it's all I want you don't have to memorize all these facts. I just want you to understand it's more complex. You can't say Native American Indians versus settlers. That's not necessarily how it shapes up. Okay, sometimes they're helping each other, sometimes they're fighting each other, and so it's way more complex than just keeping it simple. Okay, but look at this. The population of Native Americans in 1848, and then just about 50 years later, look how it dwindles. So this is the changing population in Utah. So what happens to the Native American animals? Because the animals are going to affect their lifestyle. Okay, diseases, maybe from the mountain men's animals. The Native Americans could have killed off some of the animals to get money for trading furs and just the capitalist system there. Climate change. The winters were harsh. What happens to all of the game here in Utah? Now your book doesn't really mention something. Something else is mentioned worth mentioning that's not in your book. What else could have happened? Okay, so the settlers. You have more people now in Utah. More people, using and harvesting these resources, and so that could have affected the animals in Utah as well. All right. So what is the Columbian Exchange? You had the old world over here, and you have the new world over here. And Columbus will sail over here and bump into these islands over there and bring back, it's the biggest exchange of plants and animals and diseases in the world's history. Okay? So we feel good about Columbian Exchange. Remember that from last year? Remember, my little thing is Columbian Exchange is what makes pizza possible. There are no, over here, Italy. There are no tomatoes in Italy until the Columbian Exchange. Now you can have pizza sauce. Well, the diseases from the Columbian Exchange, sort of the same sort of theme. there's now new diseases in Utah, and the Native Americans have no immunity, and they have no cure, no medicine for these new diseases. Okay, conflict and cooperation. That is part of Utah's history. Sometimes, the settlers, they won't pay for Indian lands, or they'll fence off lands. The Native Americans didn't have fences. Okay, so this is a different concept. They also cooperate, though. Indians show settlers how to eat the sago lily. Remember, that's our state flower, because the settlers, they needed to eat the bulbs or the roots in order to survive. And then pioneers will bring, the natives starve too. Pioneers will bring food to the natives. So sometimes they're in conflict, sometimes they cooperate.
Indians. There were northern Shoshone to the north, Goshutes and western Shoshone to the west, Utes to the south, and Paiutes to the southwest. The Great Salt Lake Valley, however, had for some time been a sort of buffer zone between the various tribes. There were no Indian villages near the initial settlement site, and the Mormons were not yet encroaching on territorial claims of any particular group. When they looked beyond the Salt Lake Valley, however, they intruded upon established territory in almost any direction. Their good fortune was that the full implications of their settlement in the Great Basin didn't occur to the native leaders until the Mormons were present in numbers sufficient to withstand Indian resistance. The final favorable circumstance came from their own group character and their experiences as a people over the previous 17 years. Had each gone out to settle his own farm or gone prospecting, or had many been enticed by California, the Mormon story would have been greatly altered. But the saints by this time were instinctively obedient to those they saw as their legitimate authorities. Oh, sure, they grumbled and some dissented, but most eventually moved in directions urged by their leaders. It would have made more sense, been more rational from one point of view, had they set about immediately building their own homes for their wives and families, rather than helping to build a community bowery or plowing in a common field. But to do so would have been repugnant to Mormon notions of authority, unity, and order. Thus, the principles which were to shape Mormon use of this land were worlds away from the more highly individualistic approach common to other Western settlements. Brigham Young enunciated the basic philosophy of Mormon settlement in the Great Basin in his sermon.